back at the Bellagio. We've got ourselves a multi-day vlog on our hands here. That quick gym sequence you saw was from yesterday early afternoon. Later that day, I made it over to a new property that we have not been to before on the vlog. Guess where we are? Take your 3 guesses. Nope. Nope, not that one either. Nope, you're all wrong. Every single person is wrong. All 3 guesses incorrect. This is the Green Valley Ranch, located in fabulous Henderson, Nevada. Nevada. Just off the 215 here, down in Henderson. Nice part of town, really nice property. You're not gonna be finding any you know, A-list superstar DJ parties going on down here at this resort, but you will find a very solid resort, great pool, great restaurants, and a pretty nice poker room. Generally, they'd probably be known just for having 1-2 games, as well as like some 2-4, maybe 3-6 limit games going on as well. But interestingly enough, they've been getting both 5-5 and over the past couple days, a 5-10 game. I was looking at Bravo earlier today, saw that they had a 5-10 game. Minimum buy-in is $500, no maximum. I'm gonna buy in for $2,000. I believe the game is currently 7-handed. Let's go. There's not exactly a big list of players that are looking to play 5-10 at the Green Valley Ranch, so as a result, the game was pretty short-handed for the most part, but I'm actually a fan of some short-handed play. I think I prefer short-handed over full ring, especially when it's with a good group of guys, and this was a pretty fun table. Lots of banter going on, pretty good action in the game. So let's check out some hands here real quick. In the first one, we were playing 5-handed, and I have the button straddle on. Folds around to the small blind, who makes it 65 to go. Folds over to me, and I look down an ace-4 offsuit. Getting a pretty good price here with the button straddle on. I go ahead and defend it. So we go heads up to a flop. Ace-queen-6 with 2 diamonds. The small blind puts out a bet. He makes it $85. I make the call. Turn is an offsuit 7. This time he bets $160. It's pretty close here, I think. But having a top pair and facing this sizing, it's not really that big of a sizing. So facing some bigger bets, I think I'd probably find a fold here, but for this sizing, I make the call. River's the 4 diamonds, so puts 3 diamonds on board now. He doesn't stop betting, he bets $185. So it's another tough spot since it's even smaller bet now compared to the size of the pot. Obviously not a smaller bet size in raw dollars, but compared to the size of the pot, smaller percentage now. We can't beat flush draws now, but we can beat big aces. So getting this price, don't think I have much choice whatsoever. I toss in the call and my opponent rolls over 10-9 of diamonds. Gets there on the river, picked up a straight draw there as well to go along with his flush draw. Sized it appropriately to get a call out of the ace all along the way, and then making 2 pair there on the river. Don't think I have much choice. Next hand, still playing 5-handed with the button straddle on. I look down at ace-9 offsuit in the cutoff. I think it's okay to open this one here. Not 100% necessary, but should be the best hand with just the button and the blinds left to act. So I make it 65 to go. The button makes the call and the other 2 players fold. Heads up to a super dry flop of king 3-3 rainbow. On this type of board, I think it favors me pretty heavily. I think I can put out a small bet here with my entire range and try and deny equity from all hands. So I put out a bet of $45. My opponent makes an interesting decision here. He decides to put in a raise and he makes it $145 to go. Not really repping too many hands here other than a 3, and that's really about it, because I'm not so sure what sort of king type hands here he would be raising that he didn't 3-bet with pre-flop. So ace-9 I would expect to still be the best hand here. Perhaps my sizing might induce him since it's such a small c-bet size. So not looking to go anywhere just yet, so I'd go ahead and make the call. Turn is an offsuit queen. I check it, and this time he checks back. River is an offsuit 9. So we improve from ace high to 2 pair. I don't think there's too much point in betting here though. I'm not gonna get a king to fold, obviously not getting a 3 to fold. Maybe could get a queen to fold if I size big enough, but I think I have some showdown value here, and I still don't expect him to have too much too often. So I decided to check it over to him again, and he checks it back. Seems like he's given up here, and I show my hand and it's good. So able to hold on there with the ace-9 offsuit. In the next hand, 5-handed once again, and I have the button straddle on this time. Folds around to the small blind who limps in, big blind also limps in, and I look down at pocket 5s. I think a pair race to be the best hand here versus the 2 blinds who limped in, and I have position, so looking to put some more money in. I raise it up to $85. The small blind jams it all in there. He doesn't have too much of a stack here. He's only got about 450 more. The big blind folds and it's back over to me. Not that great of a situation here. Don't really like either option that much. Since he's only got a little over $500, in a 5-10 game, that's 50 big blinds, but with a straddle on and effective stack sizes being halved, that's a very small stack. In a 10-20 game, that's only 25 big blinds. So I expect him to have some overcard, ace king, ace queen, ace jack suited type holdings often enough for us to be flipping a pretty decent rate, pretty decent frequency. If he happens to have an overpair, we still have some equity, although it's not that great of a situation. But I decided to make the call since it's not too much more effective in, like I said, a straddle pot. So we're off to see all 5 cards. Queen, jack, 8, jack, 5. We end up with a full house. My opponent shows us pocket 9s, so we get a little bit lucky here, or a lot lucky in this exact situation. I think it's probably so-so. I don't hate it completely. Like I said, we might be slightly behind his range, but obviously not my greatest call of all time, but I've made worse calls, let's be honest here. Next interesting hand, I look down at 7-5 of diamonds, no straddle on, 5-handed, I make it 30 to go. The small blind puts it a 3-bet and he makes it $100. The big blind cold calls, so I think I would probably consider a fold here, facing just the initial raiser, but having that extra money in from the big blind as well, getting a better price, 3 ways with a suited 1-gapper. Seems okay to make the call here, I think. So I toss in the call and we go 3 ways to a flop. Pretty favorable flop for the 7-5 of diamonds. It comes 5-4-3 with 2 diamonds. Top pair plus a flush draw, backdoor straight draw, backdoor everything draw. Small blind puts out a bet and he bets 175. Not the biggest c-bet into 2 players. However, the big blind puts in a bigger bet himself. He makes it 600 to go. Now it's a very interesting spot. I'm about $2,000 effective with the big blind. The small blind only has maybe $600 or so himself. So it's a really interesting spot considering all the different ranges here. It seems extremely likely that the big blind has some sort of a big pair, something along the lines of pocket queens. The small blind is also going to have some ace-king type holdings some percentage of the time. The big blind could potentially have an ace-king of diamonds type hand himself. He could have a better flush draw than us. However, we have a pair, so we can never be in too terrible of shape here, and it's much more likely that our hand has connected with this board via one of the sets, one of the potential sets, than the big blind. I'd expect him to have a bigger hand, bigger pair most of the time, and I'd expect him to fold those smaller pairs most of the time, some of the time at least. So if the big blind does happen to have a hand like pocket queens, pocket jacks, and we put in a raise, we go for maximum fold equity to go along with our raw hand equity, there's a pretty decent chance that we can get him off of that type of a hand. If we are to put in the 3-bet on the flop, jam all in here, it's got to look pretty strong to the big blind's position. So I think that seems like the best option here. Realize our equity to the maximum, go for maximum fold equity, jam it all in there, $2,000 effective with the big blind. The small blind seems to be resigned to his fate because he just calls it off immediately. So he calls it off for about $600. The big blind feels a little disgusted with himself apparently. He's kicking himself a little bit for the raise there. He folds, he puts in the fold and he shows kings, folds king's face up. Turns out the small blind has pocket aces, so he wasn't in a folding mood, and for this price, not going anywhere. Apparently, he's only got a little over $400 left himself, so not gonna throw the pocket aces away. We are flipping in this situation. The turn does not improve our hand. The river does improve our hand. River is 10 of diamonds, and we make a flush. We get ourselves a pretty favorable run out for the 5-7 of diamonds, and we take down a pretty good sized pot there. So those were a few of the more interesting hands from the Green Valley Ranch session. I would love to be able to mix this into the rotation if possible, if this game continues to go at a semi-regular frequency. Either way, we had ourselves a good session over there last night. We got into the game for $2,000, got out of the game for $3,680, I believe. Profit of $1,680 according to my math. So good session of poker, and that leads us to today. Here we are back at the Bellagio, our office outside of the regular office. Time to get back in there. 5 Diamond is going on. 5 Diamond WPT still going on. They got 4 5-10 games going. Usual drill. We'll be in for $1,500. Back to work. Wrapping up the session, the old walk through the North Valley. Some speculation as to whether they might close down the North Valley if the Bellagio keeps getting robbed, but seems unlikely. $6:33 in the morning, long session. Probably going to go catch a nap, come right back to you with some hands.
Chilling here at Container Park, downtown Las Vegas, East Fremont District. This place is literally built out of shipping containers. Retail park / restaurants and bars. Pretty cool little concept here that is something out of the ordinary, a little bit different. All part of Tony Hsieh's vision for the downtown project here in Las Vegas. All these retail shops, literally sitting in containers. I think they're somewhat supposed to be like incubator sort of places for new businesses to get their start before they blossom into the real world. A proper retail location, maybe. Some places stay here longer than others. The restaurants and bars are sort of permanent fixtures, assuming they do well enough. Chilling here at Bin 702 inside Container Park. Good spot to get a glass of wine. Cheers. So it's currently Thursday evening. When we last spoke, when I last left you, it was Thursday morning. I'm really glad we had that little chat about whether or not to really focus on cranking these vlogs out or just sort of go about the plan, especially as it pertains to poker, get those sessions in, get those hours in. That's really helped me as far as decreasing the stress level slightly and being able to do everything that I need to do. But yeah, we got some hands to talk about. In this session. There's a big convention being held by Amazon all over Las Vegas right now, as well as that WPT event. So that makes for a lot of games going on, particularly at the Bellagio. Let's get in some hands from that 5-10 game. In the first interesting hand, the Under the Gun +2 player opens for $40. The Cutoff makes the call, and I look down at Queen 10 offsuit on the button. It's slightly speculative, but I think it's okay here with a getting a pretty good price here with a caller in between and having last position on the button. Like to defend the button, so I make the call, and the big blind calls as well. We go 4 ways to a flop of 9-8-3 rainbow, 2 overcards plus gutter. Big blind checks. Initial raiser puts out a bet of 100. The Cutoff calls. I don't think I can go anywhere, so I make the call. Big blind fold. So 3 ways to a turn card. Turn is a king of spades, which brings it back to our flush draw. Both players check to me. So there's a lot of cards where I would bet here after action checks to me, but on a king, I'm not too sure what I can represent here. The king should definitely be better for the initial raiser's range than it should be for my range. There's a lot of cards that I would bet, but I just decided to check it back because I don't think it makes too much sense for me to bet here on this card. River, on the other hand, pretty favorable card. Offsuit jack, so we have the nuts here on the river. Now the initial raiser goes ahead and puts out a bet. He bets $260. Good news. The player on my right makes the call. Additional good news. Now it's just time to decide how much we want to raise. I don't think I should have too many bluffs here in my range when I put in a raise. 10 jack makes a pair on the river, so unless I decide to turn that into a bluff with a raise, that seems unlikely. 6-7 might be a possibility. One of very few possibilities of bluffs. Some other pair that I would turn into a bluff, but I don't think I would do that on this run out and facing two opponents. So I don't think I need to make my sizing too polarized. I decided on a sizing of $690. The under the gun +2 player goes into the tank. Eventually he decides on a call. Other player folds, so we are obviously scooping this pot. No showdown for my opponent, but happy to scoop this one, making the nuts on the river. In this next hand, the under the gun +1 player limps. I look down at pocket jacks in the hijack. Fourth best hand ever created, debatably close between ace king. Anyway, I decided to put in a raise of $40. The button puts in a 3-bet. He goes 140. Folds back to me. We're definitely deep enough to set mine here. Just play a post flop hand. And I don't want to put in a 4-bet and then face a 5-bet. That would be a pretty crappy situation. So I decided on a flat call. We go heads up to a flop. Flop comes queen 10-6 with 2 diamonds. I check it, and the button puts in a C-bet. Bets $160. Can't go anywhere just yet with only the 1 overcard to the pocket jacks. So I go ahead and make the call. Turn is a 5 of diamonds. I check it, and this time he checks back. So I have to think I have the best hand here some decent number of the time. He could have an overpair and trying to pot control versus a potential flush, but I also think he's going to have a lot of worse hands some decent amount of the time. River's an offsuit 8. Even though I think I have the best hand a decent amount of time, I don't know if I can get value from too many hands. So I decided to check it over to him again. This time he puts out a very small bet. It's only $130. So it's a little bit awkward, a little bit weird of a situation. It's such a good price. Although this doesn't feel like a very bluffy sort of size. I feel like it's the kind of size where I might be getting milked a decent amount of the time if I call. But you guys know the drill by now. There's no need to be long-winded about it. For that price, don't want to go anywhere. Want to see what happened. I feel like I lost, but I want to see how. So I toss in the call, and my opponent rolls over pocket 8s. The old 2-outer there on the river. Not too pleased about that, but it was a good situation for us until the 2-outer on the river. What can you do? In this next hand, I look down at 7-6 of clubs, playing, I think, 7-handed, maybe 8-handed. We're under the gun, and it's close, but I think it's okay to open. The game is playing fairly straightforward, relatively straightforward, so I think it's okay in this exact spot. I open it up for 30. We get 3 calls, so 4 ways to a flop of 10, 9, 3 with 2 clubs. Flush draw plus gutter ball. The blinds check, and having 7 high here, but with pretty good equity, I make a C-bet of $80. Folds back to the big blind, who makes the call. Heads up to a turn card of an offsuit 3, and he checks it over to me again. So it's a decision here of whether to barrel this street and blank rivers, or check here and take a free card heading into the river. With 7-6 of clubs, I think it's a little bit of a mixed bag here. I think I should have a little bit of a range advantage here because I have all of the overpairs, and I can also have all the sets here and the 2 pairs, at least 10-9, since I would never expect my opponent to just check call, or I shouldn't say never, but rarely expect him to just check call with pocket 10s, pocket 9s, 10-9 on this flop, pretty wet flop. I can also have jacks, queens, kings, aces, less likely for him to have those. I do block flush draws, which is a negative, a con to barreling here, but I think he can also have a lot of other hands, draws, some other club draws plus some straight draws, queen jack, king queen, all those hands are either going to have to fold the turn here or fold to a river barrel. So I decided to put in a second barrel here. I bet $180. My opponent makes the call here, so we're heading into a river card, which is the ace of clubs. So we end up making a flush on the river. Interesting though, my opponent leads out on this card, leads out for $400. Somewhat sizable bet, and I'm not too sure how many value hands that we can beat. We can beat some hands with an ace, such as ace 10 or ace 9. We lose to almost all the flushes. He could, however, be turning this card into a bluff, some sort of a scare card. It's a little bit weird of a situation for him to be leading out when we have the flush and it's possible that he could be using the flush card as a scare card as well, potentially with a straight draw. So that's a long-winded way of saying I'm never folding here. I'm only calling 100% of the time. So I toss in the call. Unfortunately, my opponent rolls over the jack high flush. So couldn't get him off it on the turn, and unfortunately it comes in on the river for both of us. Flush over flush situation, riding the waves here in this session, winning some hands, losing some hands. And in this next hand, I think again we're playing maybe 7 or 8 handed. There's an early position limp. The button raises it up to $40, and I look down in the big blind at 2 aces. The best hand ever created. Time to put in a 3-bet. Pretty standard 4x sizing out of position and make it $160 to go. Folds back to the button, who's not done raising. He makes it $430 to go. Man, sweet news when you have pocket aces facing a 4-bet. So my opponent only has about 800 or so behind after the $430 raise. I decided to play it a little bit tricky, a little bit deceptive. I decide on a flat call in this situation, looking to hopefully get it in on just about every flop. So I flat, we go heads up to a flop, 5-3 deuce with 2 clubs. Pretty good flop because all over pairs should feel confident in this holding and on this flop. And they are also going to want to protect versus a potential ace-king type hand that I could have. So I check it over to my opponent. My opponent does go ahead and jam his last $800 into the middle. Obviously snap calling here. He asks if I have the aces this time, and yep, it's good to hear that sort of a question. Usually means we are in fantastic shape, and I would pretty much never expect to be in anything but fantastic shape on this flop. So turns out my opponent has ace-king, and we are just about free rolling here, barring any super craziness such as king-king, but all good on the turn and river. And some good news, some run good here. Pick up pocket aces in the big blind versus a razor on the button. Anytime you get into a sort of button versus blinds situation, ranges could be perceived to be much wider. So when you do have the goods versus a very premium hand on the button as well, that's a recipe for some good news. Okay, one more hand to discuss from this session, and this hand is one of the most epic hands of the vlog. That is some build-up, I'm sure. So the under the gun player kicks it off right away, makes it $30 to go. The under the gun +1 player puts in a 3-bet, makes it $130 to go. Some action right off the bat in the first 2 positions. Folds over to the small blind, who puts in a 4-bet. He makes it $380 to go. Folds over to us in the big blind, and we look down at pocket aces once again, facing a 4-bet before it has even reached us. Super interesting spot because the small blind, very good player, has about 1,500, maybe 14 or 1,500 effective. The under the gun player has maybe 2,000 or 2,500. The under the gun +1 player has maybe $3,500 total. So obviously it's a decision between putting in a 5-bet, the cold 5-bet out of the big blind. How often does that happen? Putting in that 5-bet or flatting for that ultimate deception with the pocket aces in the big blind. Since the big blind has 1.5K and there's some pretty big stacks on my left in the under the gun positions, I decide on the flat call because I feel like it just looks super strong. Putting in that 5-bet with the big stacks on my left, have to be somewhat concerned normally putting in that 5-bet and facing those deep stacks on my left. I also have a pretty deep stack, somewhere in the neighborhood of $3,500 as well. I think I might cover the biggest stack, not sure, but pretty close. So I decide on the flat call. The aforementioned reason is one reason, and the other reason is that since so much action came from under the gun and then the under the gun +1, there has to be some non-zero chance that the under the gun +1 player is going to put in the 5-bet himself. He's got to be weighted pretty strong to be putting in a 3-bet from that early of a position. No idea if all of those reasonings are optimal. It's not too often that you find yourself in a 5-bet or flat spot in the big blind before the action has even gotten to you. Obviously a super interesting spot that doesn't happen too often. So anyway, I decide on the flat call. The under the gun player folds. The under the gun +1 player does not fold, does not call, puts in the 5-bet. He makes it $1,250 to go. The small blind folds. So now it's down to me and the under the gun +1 player facing a 5-bet with pocket aces in the big blind, facing a raise of $1,250, and the player has approximately $2,000 behind. Now what? How often has this situation come up? Facing a raise of over 100 big blinds. So at this point, it seems like my decision is almost totally clear. You could make a case for flatting to keep the deception factor alive and well, but I gotta think, facing a 5-bet for $1,250 pre-flop, my opponent likes his hand. I decide to go with the jam. I stick it all in there. My opponent does not snap call, which is good news because we are not chopping in this situation. He's not had the other 2 aces. So he's going into the tank and asks how much it is. Like I said, he has another $2,000 or so behind. My opponent thinks for quite some time, and then he decides on a fold, and he folds pocket kings face up. Amazing. Amazing. Just amazing situation here. Crazy hand, epic hand. He finds the fold with pocket kings. So it's a good news, somewhat bad news situation. Obviously, we want to get all in there for the maximum. It's tough to complain about winning $1,500 pre-flop without any risk. We win 100% of that $1,500, but facing pocket kings, we're what, an 80% favorite or so. And for $3,500 total, 80% of $3,500 is more than $1,500. So I would still prefer to have gotten it all in there. I would prefer my opponent didn't make the hero fold, but he did it. He somehow found a fold after raising to $1,250 pre-flop. So kudos to him for somehow finding the fold there with pocket kings and getting away from it in the end. Can't complain. Cannot complain about winning $1,500 unchallenged and no risk with no community cards to crack the aces. So yeah, epic hand, and turns out to be a really good session for us. We get into the game for $1,700. We get out of the game for $5,880 for a profit of $4,180. Pretty good session there at the Bellagio 510. One of our biggest winning sessions in the vlog thus far. So it's been a good past few sessions. We had a good session at Bellagio, we had a good session at Green Valley Ranch, and then we came back to Bellagio and had another really good session. Something like plus $7,800 over the past 3 sessions, which is fantastic. That's an above average run over 3 sessions. So yeah, happy to have taken a little bit of the edge off of trying to crank these vlogs out and sort of enjoying the back and forth between cranking out the daily and then coming back and recapping the past 2 or 3 days in one vlog. Also, one thing to sort of think about, I know it is always fun to look at those past 3 sessions when they are those winning sessions, but you also have to remember that when we have 3 losing sessions in a row, that you always want to be zooming out and looking at the long-term picture. So we have to do the same when we have these winning sessions. That being said, I still think it's good to take it in a little bit, soak it in for maybe one evening, soak in that run good feeling, enjoy these little milestones along the way, enjoy the process. Remember to sort of celebrate the little wins to some degree. I played tennis all through high school and took lessons as a kid. There's a saying that's something along the lines of, you don't want to be standing around admiring your last shot. You want to get back into the ready position, center court, ready to receive that next shot and return it properly. So you don't want to be standing around basically patting yourself on the back when you have a few good sessions for too long. Have a glass of wine or whatever your speed is. Feel good about putting in the work and seeing the results. Take it in for one night, enjoy it, and then right back to it. Right back to the grind after that.